Emily Hart, 24 years old, is a surgical nurse at Asheville Hospital in North Carolina, working 3 days on and 2 days off. The outing was planned ahead of time. According to her colleague's testimony, a week before the trip, she ordered a gas canister and a membrane jacket. The route was standard, a section of the Appalachian Trail near Waya Bald, Macon County. One day, solo, Saturday morning, a gas station camera at the entrance to Franklin captures her car at 8:42. Emily buys water and energy bars. The cashier will later testify the woman was calm, paid by card, joked about the weather. She was the last person to speak to her. At 11:10, Emily's phone registers on a cell tower near Interstate 64. At 2:37, she sends her mom a panoramic photo with a caption about the great view. Then, silence. No outgoing calls, no data usage. The phone is out of range. Her mom, Margaret Hart, starts calling at 9. By morning, she'll have made 62 calls. On the 40th Sunday, she turns to the Macon County Sheriff. The statement is accepted. Emily's car is found the same day in a parking lot near the trail. The keys are missing. The salon is locked. There are no signs of struggle. A search operation unfolds according to protocol. 200 volunteers, a helicopter with a thermal imager, 4 canine teams, drones with cameras. The search grid is built from the last point of signal registration, and it is here that an error is laid, which no one will notice for the next 13 months. The radio engineer of the operator will later confirm in a written conclusion. The signal bounced off the mountain range. The phone was physically 3 miles from the calculated point. 200 people combed the wrong square for 2 weeks. The dogs pick up the trail from the parking lot and lose it on a rocky stretch a mile and a half later. The thermal imaging camera yields 4 hits. All 4 turn out to be deer. On the 12th day, headquarters reduces the groups. On the 16th, the operation is officially suspended. The protocol of the examination of things in the car records a detail that the investigators then did not appreciate. A sleeping bag was left in the trunk. Emily did not plan to spend the night. She was counting on returning to darkness. Margaret Hart comes to the sheriff's office every Monday. After 3 months, once every 2 weeks. The secretary of the department later describes in the report, the woman sat in the waiting room motionless, with her back straight, her fingers clenched on the handle of the bag to the white bones. The case is transferred to the category of unsolved. A year passes. The mountains are silent. And then, 13 months after the last photo, a seismograph of the geological group 3 miles from the search zone catches a sound underground that cannot be there. Rhythmic, repeated. 3 short strokes, 3 long, 3 short. The University of Western Carolina's geological group is working on the slopes after the flood season. The task is routine, inspecting landslide-prone areas. Seismometer number 7 is installed in a fissure above an old hunting blind. Operator Daniel Rios is collecting data and stops. The device records a periodic signal, not an avalanche, not a rock slide. The intervals are equal. The sequence repeats every few minutes. 3 short pulses, 3 long ones, 3 short ones. Rios calls the team leader. The leader calls the rescuers. The departure log records the arrival time of the first team, 17:06. An acoustic probe is lowered into the crack. On the recording attached to the case materials, muffled metal impacts on concrete are heard. Then, a sound that, according to the technician's own report, made him jerk off his headphones. A human voice. The words are indistinguishable, but it's a voice. The excavation lasts 9 hours. On the 40th night, a hydraulic cutter opens a gap in the concrete cover. A woman looks up into the beam of the flashlight from below. Thin, a gray streak across her entire head, hands in scuffs. The senior rescuer will later indicate in the report the woman did not scream or cry. She stood motionless, looked at the light, and slowly opened and closed her mouth soundlessly. The vocal cords produced a rasp only after a few minutes. They carry her on a stretcher, an ankle sprain that has healed incorrectly, exhaustion, chemical burns on her palms. The ambulance takes her to Sylvia's district hospital. There are no documents. The woman cannot name herself. When asked about her name, she stares at one point for a long time, then utters 3 different names in a row and falls silent. The standard procedure for identifying an unnamed patient is triggered. The nurse rolls her fingers. The AFI's entry is fed into the federal database. The query goes out at 3:0900 hours. At 3:14, the system spits out a match. On-duty criminalist Ruth Kowalski, by her own account in the Internal Affairs file, read the screen 3 times and manually restarted the search. The result repeated. The patient's prints from the break-in match the card in the missing persons case. The name on the card is Hannah Cole. Date of disappearance: August 12, 2006 year. Place: the same section of the trail. Age at the time of disappearance: 16 years. Kowalski calls the head of the investigative department at 3:21. On the call recording attached to the case, her phrase is heard that the system found a girl who disappeared 20 years ago, and that the girl in the room looks no more than 25. At dawn, the case of 2006 year is taken out of the archive. The box with evidence is on the investigator's table at 7 sharp, and at 8, the duty officer of the department receives a call that breaks everything. The woman on the line claims to have seen the morning news, and that the face on the screen is her daughter. But her name is not Hannah. The morning woman on the line is Margaret Hart. She is connected with the investigator at 8:17. According to the call protocol, she repeats one phrase 4 times in a row. The face in the news belongs to her daughter Emily, who disappeared 13 months ago. The dispatcher notes, the woman's voice breaks on every 3rd word. Rapid breathing is audible. But another mother arrives at the hospital first. Dorothy Cole leaves Knoxville as soon as she sees the story. 200 miles in 3 hours. The admissions ward guard records in the log. The woman presented an old photograph of her daughter and demanded to be let through. On the threshold of the ward, she stops. According to the report of the duty nurse, Dorothy Cole stood in the doorway motionless for about a minute, pressing her palm to her mouth, then slid down the doorframe to the floor. The similarity of the patient to the photograph of the 16-year-old Hannah is described by the medical staff as striking. The media erupt by noon. Federal-level headlines. A woman who went missing 20 years ago has been found alive, not having aged. There are 7 film crews outside the hospital. The version about the kidnapper doppelganger, about substitution, about an error in the archives, is being spun on the air in a circle. The investigation is proceeding according to procedure. The patient's blood and Dorothy Cole's saliva sample are being sent for an urgent kinship examination. In parallel, they are requesting Emily Hart's dental records from the Asheville clinic. The answer comes in 30 hours, and it knocks the wind out of the entire working version. There is no genetic affinity with Dorothy Cole. Instead, the DNA profile matches the samples from Emily Hart's apartment. A brush, a comb, seized during the first search operation. Dentistry confirms. Fillings, bite impressions, everything matches. Emily Hart is lying in the hospital room, alive, found. But then the investigation hits a wall. Whose fingerprints did the database pull up? The fingerprinting is repeated twice, with different sets by different experts. The result is identical. The patient's fingers match the card of Hannah Cole from the 2006 case. Two women, different DNA, same papillary lines. This doesn't happen. The senior expert writes directly in the service note, "No explanation." The case is officially duplicated. The first case. The circumstances of Emily Hart's disappearance and detention. The second, retrieved from the archive. The whereabouts of Hannah Cole, now marked urgent. Emily's interrogations yield no results. The protocols record the disintegration of her testimony. She confuses the seasons, cannot say how long she spent underground, asks the investigator 3 times who he is, although he introduced himself at the beginning of each session. When asked about food, she replies that she does not remember how she ate. A neurologist makes a diagnosis: toxic encephalopathy, brain damage of a chemical nature, prolonged exposure to vapors of unknown compounds. And here the investigative team makes a logical step, which seems to be the only possible one. Chemistry, preparations, erased memory, destroyed prints that somehow match another missing person from the same trail. The conclusion is obvious. Someone was holding her. Someone was pumping her with substances. And maybe this someone, 20 years ago, took Hannah too. A query to the archives returns a list of figures from the old case. Opposite one surname is a note about a repeat interrogation. The man who last saw Hannah Cole alive. The man who still lives on the same ridge. Earl Madsen, 67 years old, a recluse. A cabin on the north slope of the ridge, without electricity, without a phone. In the archive case of 2006 year, he passes as a witness. On August 12th, an hour before Hannah Cole's disappearance, he met her on the path. The last one who saw the girl alive. Then he was interrogated 5 times. No charges were brought. There was no evidence. The investigative group raises his case and stumbles upon a coincidence, from which the counsel falls silent. A poll from 2025, conducted in the early days of the search for Emily Hart. 2 tourists came forward saying they saw a man resembling Madsen near the fork half a mile from the parking lot where her car was found. Same day, same stretch. 2 missing women 20 years apart, and 1 man present at both points. Madsen is brought in for questioning. The video recording captures behavior that the profiler will later describe as a classic pattern of concealment. The man sits on the edge of the chair, not touching the back. For the first 20 minutes, he tears a paper napkin at the strip level and folds them into a stack. He answers questions with a delay, looks into the corner of the room, avoids eye contact. His palms leave wet marks on the table. When the investigator utters the word basement, the recording shows Madsen freezes, then abruptly gets up, knocking over a chair, and demands a lawyer. The interrogation is stopped. A search of the hut and outbuildings is sanctioned the next morning. In the shed, under the bed, a woman's hair clip is found. Plastic, faded, with signs of soil. The item is seized, entered into the description. A leak to the press occurs the same evening. The source is never established. Headlines come out at midnight. Mountain monster, lair above the trail. 20 years of hunting. Near the turnoff to Madsen's cabin, camera crews are on standby. Someone breaks his window with a rock at night. Pressure on the investigation grows by the hour. The county prosecutor demands results. Dorothy Cole gives an interview in which she mentions Madsen's surname and says she recognized his gaze 20 years ago. The petition demanding arrest is collecting 40,000 signatures per day. Investigators are working on a version to the fullest. They request cadastral plans of Madsen's plot, search for underground structures. A sinologist with a corpse dog walks around the perimeter. A georadar scans the ground under the shed. The group is preparing a petition for arrest. One link is missing, to tie Madsen to the place where Emily was kept. And here, on the table of the senior investigator, lies the answer to a routine request. The paper from Sylvia's County Hospital. A few lines from which the version that seemed ironclad begins to crack at the seams. The paper from Sylvia's County Hospital is a response to a standard request for the medical history of the suspect. The investigator reads it twice, then demands a full transcript with logs. The facts arrive the next day, and they leave no room for interpretation. 8 days before Emily Hart's disappearance, Earl Madsen fell off a slope near his own cabin. A hip fracture. He was found by a neighbor hunter and called for evacuation. Then a solid paper trail, the emergency department, surgery, complications, a second surgery, suppuration, a third. 4 months of hospitalization, then the Jackson County Rehabilitation Center, another 6 months. Crutches. Procedure journals with signatures for each day, a patient's bracelet, x-rays with dates, testimonies of 3 surgeons and 8 nurses. The conclusion of the forensic expert involved in the case, formulated without options. During the period of disappearance and detention of Emily Hart, the accused physically could not move through the terrain, descend into the ground, carry loads, or hold a person. He could not even reach his own barn. And what about the tourists who saw him at the fork on the day of disappearance? Investigators again show them photos. Both recognize another person, a seasonal trail caretaker, a man of the same stature with the same beard. The caretaker confirms that day he walked the area, met a few tourists. His patrol log coincides with the time. A hair clip from the shed. A DNA analysis of the epithelium gives a profile that does not belong to either Hannah Cole or Emily Hart. Madsen's daughter, who is contacted in Georgia, confirms. She visited her father last summer, lost an earring in the shed when she was helping to sort out the tools. The description of the item is given before the presentation of the photo. The behavior during the interrogation remains. Curiosity, a torn napkin, the demand for a lawyer at the word basement. A psychiatrist who examines Madsen at the request of the defense submits a 4-page conclusion. Key: post-traumatic stress disorder, formed 20 years ago. After interrogations in the case of Hannah Cole, fellow villagers recognized Madsen as guilty without trial. They burned down his house, the first one on the site of which the current hut stands. They broke windows, shot at the roof. The word basement sounded at every interrogation. The investigation in 2006 Trier searched for a pit on his plot and dug up half of the yard. The reaction to this word is not guilt. It's a scar. The profiler who a week earlier wrote about the pattern of concealment makes a clarification to his own conclusion. In the case materials, his phrase remains behavioral signs of stress in an innocent person with a traumatic interrogation do not differ from signs of guilt. The prosecutor removes Madsen's status as a suspect with an official letter. The press gives a refutation in small print on the inside pages. The broken window of the hut will not be reimbursed by anyone. The investigation returns to zero. 20 years between 2 disappearances. No suspect, no motive. The only carrier of answers is Emily Hart's memory, and a neurologist in the next conclusion describes her condition as insular. Fragments without chronology, without attachment, without guarantee of recovery. At the next meeting, the senior investigator crosses out Madsen's surname on the board and circles the only thing that remains. Not a person, a place. A hole in the concrete from which Emily was extracted. Concrete. In the middle of nowhere, 3 miles from the nearest road, underground, a concrete ceiling. Someone poured it there. And no one has yet asked why. The descent is scheduled for Thursday morning. A 4-person speleological group, an investigator, a forensic expert, a construction engineer. The hole is expanded with hydraulics. The first descent is on a safety rope. The depth to the bottom, 11 meters of a vertical wall. Headlights catch what cannot be under the mountain. Concrete walls, steel beams of the ceiling, ventilation boxes, crumpled and torn off. An engineer in his conclusion will restore the history of the structure, an old hunting base from the middle of the last century, the basement of which was cut out in a natural karst cavity and filled with concrete. The above-ground part was dismantled decades ago. The basement remained, and someone found an application for it. A forensic examination fixes the situation section by section. The first section, remains of industrial equipment. Stainless steel reactors melted, glassware broken, cans with precursor markings, labels faded but readable. The second section, signs of an explosion. The epicenter is near the ventilation shaft. The explosion wave collapsed part of the vault, blocked the main entrance, a tunnel that once led to the forest road. An expert demolition engineer dates the destruction to about 10 years ago. By the corrosion of the metal, by the growth of roots through the cracks, by the layer of sediment in the rubble. The conclusion is unequivocal. An illegal laboratory for the production of prohibited substances operated here. The explosion buried it, along with all its contents. The manufacturers did not return. The third section explains how Emily Hart lived underground for 13 months. Shelves with canned goods, army rations, hundreds of cans, purchased by manufacturers in reserve. Plastic barrels, a drainage pipe in the corner from which soil water seeps. Near the shelves, Emily's sleeping bag, her backpack, boots, a flashlight with dead batteries. Empty cans laid out in rows. According to the criminologist's count, there are over 400. The reconstruction of the fall coincides with the terrain to a meter. A pit camouflaged with osier and roots lies 20 steps away from the visual line of the trail. Emily stepped aside, probably to a viewpoint for a photo. The soil above the collapsed edge of the vault did not hold. A fall from height, ankle dislocation, the same one that healed incorrectly. Vertical walls without a single ledge. Exit through the adit, under the rubble. Shouting to no one. 3 miles to the trail with regular traffic, the rock muffles the sound. She began to knock when vibrations appeared above her head. A geological group was walking along the slope. The toxicologist closes the question of memory and hands. The containers destroyed by the explosion have been poisoning the air of the basement with acid and solvent vapors for decades. The concentration is non-lethal, but constant. Months of such exposure give chemical burns to the skin of the palms. Emily touched contaminated surfaces every day, and toxic encephalopathy. The brain was decaying slowly, along with the papillary lines on the fingers. And here the expert dactyloscopist puts a dot in the main paradox of the case. His conclusion takes 9 pages. The essence is contained in 3 sentences. The acid ate the skin unevenly. Fragments of Emily's patterns remained. The automated system compares not the entire prints, but the points of coincidence on fragments. And on the mangled areas, it returned a statistically rare false match with an old map scanned from 20-year-old paper cards with a lowered quality threshold. The machine was mistaken. The 2 women never had the same fingers. They were connected by degraded skin, old paper, and mathematics. The investigator closes the notebook. The case of Emily Hart consists entirely of a fall, a trap, survival, a mistake of the system. There is no kidnapper. There never was. But in the evening of the same day, a psychotherapist working with Emily sends a service note to the investigator. During the session, The patient repeated a phrase she has already said for the third time in a week. She dreams of notches on the wall, long rows of notches, and she insists she didn't make them. The psychotherapist's note is initially put in a stack of secondary materials. The patient's testimony with encephalopathy, dreams, obsessive images, the evidentiary weight is 0. But the investigator raises the protocols of the basement inspections and checks. In none of the 3 inspected sections, the notches on the walls were not recorded. The criminologist reviews the photo fixation, hundreds of frames. The walls are clean. If Emily saw the notches, she saw them where the inspection did not reach. The engineering plan of the structure provides the answer. The basement level of the old base, according to the project logic, had a 4th section, a storage one, behind the northern wall. There is a passage there on the plans. On the spot, a solid collapse. That part of the vault that collapsed during the explosion. The inspection stopped in front of it because the collapse was considered death. A repeated descent is scheduled for 2 days. Miners cleared the collapse for 8 hours. Behind the 3rd layer of rock, a gap opens. A narrow passage as wide as the shoulders of an adult. The first rescuer passes it on exhalation. His report fixes the sequence: the beam of the flashlight, the far wall, a child's backpack of pink color, faded to gray, sneakers. Then the second. Then the remains. Work stops. The section is declared the scene of the event. A forensic expert and an anthropologist work for another day. The skeletal remains belong to a female, aged 15 to 17 years at the time of death. The time since death is approximately 20 years. A request for Hannah Cole's dental records is made that same evening. Comparison of the X-rays takes the experts 40 minutes. The match is complete. The identification protocol contains a dry phrase: the person has been identified. The reconstruction of the events of 2006 fits the local area without gaps. On August 12, 16-year-old Hannah Cole strayed from the trail on the same tract. The natural karst cavity had a second sinkhole over the northern section. Hannah fell years before a lap appeared in the adjacent holes. At the time of her fall, the basement stood abandoned and empty. The storage section, no supplies, no water, no exit. The search operation in 2006, according to archived maps, passed 300 meters from the sinkhole. The dogs didn't take the trail through the thickness of the breed. The anthropologist records a detail that enters the case in a separate sheet. On the wall above the place of discovery of the remains, rows of notches scratched with a sharp stone. The stone lies here. The notches are grouped by 7. The total number is 47. 47 days. The examination will clarify. Part of the notches are deep and even. The last dozen are increasingly weaker. The last 3 are barely readable on the stone. The question remains of how Emily saw what was behind the rubble. The investigator returns to the ventilation plans. The broken duct in the section where Emily lived connected to the northern section with a through channel. The opening is at eye level, the diameter of a palm. The beam of her flashlight, while the batteries lived, reached through the channel to the opposite wall, to the notches. Emily saw them in fragments for months, and the ruins memory preserved the image, rejecting everything else. She didn't know whose they were. She lived a wall away from the answer. Dorothy Cole was notified the next morning. The officer's report, who accompanied her to identify the items, records: the woman took a pink backpack with both hands, brought it to her face and didn't make a sound for 3 minutes. Then she asked only one: how many days her daughter was held. The officer didn't answer. The answer lay in the case files, and it weighed more than any words. The girl, who had been presumed a victim of a kidnapper for 20 years, had been 300 meters from the search parties for all 47 days. Alive. And in a neighboring state that same week, the investigative team opened another front. The serial numbers of the reactors from the lab gave the first match in the federal database. The equipment had been purchased by living people, and 2 of them were already in the system.
The final of the case unfolds on 3 fronts simultaneously, and each is closed with the accuracy of a court verdict. The first front, the laboratory. The serial numbers of the reactors lead to a supply of industrial equipment in Knoxville. The firm has long changed its owner, but the sales archive has been preserved on paper media in the basement of the warehouse. The buyer is a dummy company, registered to a person who died 2 years before the deal.
A dead end? No. The banking trail is alive. The payment went through a transfer, and the sender's account pulls a chain of 3 surnames in the federal database. 2 of them are already serving long terms in a neighboring state for similar production, uncovered years later at another point. During the interrogation in the colony, the first person, according to the protocol, is silent for 11 minutes, looking at the table, then asks the prosecutor for a deal. His testimony restores the chronology without gaps. The laboratory under the mountain was equipped, having learned about the abandoned basement from a deceased relative hunter who remembered the old base still operational. The equipment was lowered through the edit at night, in parts, over 2 months. They did not know about the girl behind the collapse of the northern section. The passage there had collapsed even before their appearance. When the ventilation burst and the vault went cracked, they ran away and did not return. They wrote off the point along with the equipment because the risk exceeded the profit. They learned from the TV in the prison block that their army rations and their drainage pipe would save a person's life in 10 years. The second defendant refuses to testify, but his signature is on the supplier's invoice. The third participant is taken in Tennessee on the 4th day after the announcement of the search, at a car wash where he worked under an assumed name. All 3 are added new episodes of accusation. The prosecutor submits a separate petition to the materials, a circumstance that has no procedural name. The building created for the crime twice became a trap, and once a shelter. The second front, Hannah. The funeral is scheduled 20 years and 2 months after her disappearance. The coffin is carried by 4 rescuers, the same ones who cleared the rubble of the northern section. Dorothy Cole stands by the grave upright, without tears, clutching the pink strap of the backpack in her hand. The only thing she was allowed to keep until the end of the examination. Journalists are not allowed into the cemetery, but the phrase she utters over the coffin spreads across all the tabloids of the country that same evening, as it is recorded by the dictaphone of a local reporter behind the fence. My daughter was found by a girl who was herself dead to everyone. The headline lives for a week on the front pages. The case of Hannah Cole is officially closed. An accident. Death due to a fall and inability to get out. In the column for the guilty, a dash. Earl Metzen does not come to the funeral. But the next morning, the caretaker of the cemetery fixes a bouquet of mountain laurel on the fresh grave, cut, according to the botanist from the local newspaper, on the north slope of the ridge. There, where a single hut stands on the entire slope. Dorothy Cole, having learned about the bouquet, sends a letter to the address of that hut. The content of it is unknown. It is only known that for the first time in 20 years, she wrote the surname Metzen without the word she had been adding to it all these years. The third front, Emily. Memory returns by islands. This is literally recorded in neurological conclusions. She remembers the fall. She recalls the count of cans, laid out empty in rows so as not to lose count of the days, and still lost count. She recalls the beam of the flashlight in the ventilation opening and the rows of scratches on the distant wall,
which her brain refused to explain for months. 6 months after discharge, she does what the psychotherapist in the report will call the final act. Alone, unaccompanied, she walks the same section of the trail. From the parking lot to the turn to the observation point. Near the turn, a memorial plaque with the name of Hannah Cole and 2 dates now stands. Emily puts a stone under the plaque. Ordinary, sharp, picked up here on the slope. The trail supervisor who saw her from afar will record in the patrol journal a detail that cannot be invented. The woman stood by the sign for exactly as long as his patrol of the section lasts. 47 minutes. And the last document of the case. A service note about a technical error of the automatic identification system is attached to the last volume. It contains a resolution of the senior investigator written by hand over the printed text. The most useful mistake in the history of this district. And under the resolution, a fresh sheet, added already after the official closure of both proceedings. The response of the analytical department to the request which the investigator submitted on his own initiative. Over 20 years of operation, the system had produced 3 more similar matches in the mountain counties of the state, marked by operators as false positives. 3 cases, 3 missing people, 3 points on the mountain map. All 3 matches were written off as errors at the time, and no one ever went out to check. 3 marks in the database are still waiting.